I want to ask you about one last thing
Yeah, go
before
ahead.
we end this, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and I may write about it, which is about the exportation of American problems. So we're fairly now living in a we're living in a fairly American world or Americanized world, right? Like American culture got truly proliferated. Our generation, me and you grew up in Israel, you grew up in Egypt. There's so much American culture in our own environment that we grew up in, that there
Right,
is a common kind of overarching American culture now for the entire world, especially if you're a middle class. If you're a middle class young person from our generation, I think that's what it really started. You live in a city, you are Americanized to a considerable extent.
right,
With that comes a lot of values, like a lot of amazing American values that,
right,
like where you come from doesn't really truly matter or define the worth of the individual. A lot of great American values that America helped the world is. But I feel also with that comes a lot of American problems that don't truly reflect our own societies.
hmm,
Like people start thinking of the world in terms of American terms, like racial terms that never truly exist. Like the whole thing about are Jews white or not white, that conversation is irrelevant to both Israelis or Arabs, right?
right.
Like the Arabs, they don't see white doesn't mean anything. I mean, Linda Sarsour is probably whiter than you are in terms of skin color, right?
I wouldn't go that far. I'm very white.
But yeah, but she's whiter than the vast majority of
Right.
Israeli Jews, right?
Yeah,
And
that I'm specifically Polish Ashkenazi, so I
yeah,
really wouldn't take it as an example, but yeah, definitely.
yeah, yeah,
I have some friends who would be mistaken as, you know,
yeah,
would be mistaken as many other things than Israeli
yeah.
Jews.
But that's
So
that entire term and that entire racial construct of white versus it's purely American. It's not even European. It's purely American. In the Middle East, for Arabs, for example, what's more relevant would be that they see Israelis as foreigners. Now, as what it has nothing to do with color. That's how to do race. They're foreign, right? They're
right,
not from here. They are Western. They are foreign. So that's just an example of of how also America exported American problems that don't really relate. And a lot of people in our generation and the younger generation grow up thinking with those in their about their own societies and those American terms, not realizing that there is a discrepancy. And maybe I'll give another example, and then I can let you to answer this. I was talking to this our generation Israeli Arab girl, very nice, educated, speaks English fluently. You can tell, okay, went to college, middle class, never lived in America, but you can tell she's from the new global middle class youth.
right, right,
And I'm talking about her, and she's doing some interfaith work or something, and bringing Jews and Arabs and talking. It's like an amazing work organization. So I talked about her to her in order to see if there's an opportunity to help her in what she's doing or contribute. And then when she found out that I worked for a Zionist organization, Sandra, she was like, "No, I want nothing with Zionism. I want nothing that supports Israel. I want nothing." And that was really weird. I was like, "Okay, all right. That's why you're Israeli. You're trying to help. You're bringing Jews and Arabs." And she said, "No, listen. I'm not. I don't want anything pro-Israeli. I'm pro-Middle East." I was like, "Okay, okay. You're pro-Middle East. Israel is in the Middle East. So if you're pro-Middle East, you're pro-Palestinian, and you're pro-Israeli." And she tried to explain to me, like, listen, Hussein, you don't understand. I grew up here. Of course I'm Israeli, but it's really difficult growing up as a minority, growing up as an Arab in a country that I feel many times that uh, it doesn't represent me, and I question myself, does this represent me or not? And she had this, and I had a lot of compassion for what I was saying because I understand the minority experience, and I understand no matter where you are, even in America, there is a certain amount of inconsistency about who you think you are and about how that the general country is represented. And I
right,
told her that. I told her, listen, I understand. Being a minority is always difficult, no matter where you're gonna be. But Israel is better than many other places. I would rather be a minority in Israel than being in any other country. And I said that thinking of all of the Middle East, pretty much, right? Like if you're going to be a minority, you would rather be a minority in Israel than any other country in the Middle East.
right.
And then she told me, "No, Hussein, but I'm not an immigrant." I'm from here. And that was a really, real weird response. Like, what does that mean? And then I figured, oh, she's Americanized. She thinks in the world, the problems of the world in terms of American problems, American minority problems are problems mainly of immigrants, right? So I was thinking, yeah, I shouldn't have a problem of minorities. I shouldn't be treated as a minority because I'm not an immigrant. And then I told her, are Christians in Syria, Iraq, Egypt are immigrants? Are Yazidis immigrants? Are Kurds immigrants? Like, have some perspective.
Right.
And this is just an example of how this person's view of the world was skewed by an American, an American understanding of society, despite the fact that she never lived in America, right? So I want you to tell me about that, about how do you see any, like, what do you think about that as an Israeli?
Well, my perspective of that is, well, first of all, that's something I never got to think about. So you're kind of you're catching me
Yeah,
off
I'm
guard.
startling. Yeah,
Yeah,
I'm
but
sorry.
no, don't be.
Yeah,
That's nice. I like playing fast on my feet. So let's see. Well, off the top of my head, and since I didn't get a chance to think to think
yeah.
this through, uh, I would say that I think it is true that
Mm.
we tend to think that we get a lot of views from a lot of views that are Americanized,
Yeah,
and where you see it most, I suppose, is um, in that notion that whoever is on the other side,
mm.
um, like I'm thinking, I mean, in terms of like the oppressor
Yeah,
and the person who and you know and the person who's being oppressed. So you always have to have an underdog,
yeah.
and that underdog is
Better.
always on, yeah, and it's always on the right.
Yeah,
It's and that this is what I feel because there is and it comes from American. The reason why I'm connecting this to being Americanized is because of actually because of television. Uh, because I think about myself, and I
right.
have great affection to American to parts of American culture. There are a lot of illnesses that I understand that American societies has, and I'm not blind to them. I still think that if I had to choose where to live in the world, I think that America is definitely on
Yeah,
my top three. So,
definitely.
um, but we grew up watching television,
Right.
American television, and we grew up with these values. Uh, and there is this big gap that we're trying to bridge between, on one hand, how is it that the underdog is always right,
Yeah,
and they're always they're always oppressed, and they're always succumb, and they always make it. And that's the television we get of like the last 20 to 30 years. I'm not talking about old
right.
movies. Maybe it's my affection to old movies that really makes me a little more open to
Hmm.
conservatism. But
Yeah,
so that on one hand, but on the other hand, all you really want to do
hmm,
is to become more on the side of the oppressor.
right.
What you really want to do is, you want to make it. You want to live in prosperity. You want to have enough to have everything you want. You want your family to live in peace. You
Yeah,
want you want all these little pleasures that a westernized society can give you,
right, right.
but that creates a tension between the fact that you think that because you're not the underdog. If you manage to achieve all these things, then you're not the underdog anymore.
Yeah,
And if you're not the underdog, you know exactly who you are.
yeah,
And that's a sort of a
yeah,
tension that I feel that's been exported also to Israel as a society, out of since we're open to the world, and we're open to Americanization, which I'm grateful
yeah,
for,
yeah,
by
yeah.
the way.
Yeah,
But
no, it's great. It's great. It's a lot of great values. It's definitely a lot of great values. But with it, as I said, they come with the American values come
great
American
responsibility.
problems. Great, great responsibilities. Yeah, yeah. American problems, and American understandings of their own world, which are more relatable to the United States and the American society and how it evolved. Um, yeah, so
And it's interesting to see that in Israel, because I believe this is the only place in the Middle East where, the consumption of American of American we consume Americanization a lot more than any other country in the
yeah,
Middle
yeah,
East, which creates a huge gap between us and the rest of the countries around us,
yeah,
and that's
that's true.
and one I mean
I
and
mean,
that plays.
I wouldn't say that's the thing. I wouldn't say it creates a gap between you. Okay, the people who do that usually end up being overwhelming. I mean, everybody does it to varying degrees, but the people who
When you
do
say
it the
does it,
most,
what do you mean?
like consume a lot of Americanism. The people who do that the most, like at that very peak of that level of consumption, usually end up being on the liberal left, right? Uh, the gap is between those
I'm,
and
I'm
the rest of the region.
so I'm not sure I agree with you, because I think we as a society are already Americanized
Yeah,
I mean, as an Israeli society. Oh, but you were going to finish an idea there, so please go.
I agree. No, but I was saying that the problem is that the people that represent the culture today in almost any society, so artists, writers, usually they do belong to the elite. And they
Right.
usually represent their own culture in a very like it's unidimensional. It's only one
Mm-hmm.
direction. It's usually
Mm-hmm.
one act. Exactly like Hollywood. Like Hollywood is
Mm-hmm.
not truly representative of the United States. It's representative only of the coastal culture,
Mm-hmm.
but it doesn't truly represent the entirety of the United States. But that's what people outside of America see, right?
Mm-hmm.
I would say the same thing about a country probably like Israel, that the cultural elite represent an image of Israel that is far into one direction that doesn't necessarily represent their reality.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're saying. With that, what I wanted to address on this was that it creates a gap between Israel and the rest of the countries in the Middle East in a way that um, in the I mean, it plays for us and it plays against us. So we as
Right.
a society are enjoying the comforts and the privileges of being a Western Americanized society.
Yeah.
However, when it comes to our image in the eyes of the world, because we take responsibility over our own faith, because and we go after this American value of make for your own, provide for yourself, defend yourself, take responsibility over who you are, build yourself with what
Yeah.
you have, use the resources that you have, be innovative, so we do that. And because everybody and that makes a tiny little state, and it's so important that people will understand this, that takes a pinhead on the world map and
Right.
makes it the oppressor, because it's not the underdog anymore of literally the rest of the map that is around
Yeah.
us, which is like the Middle East, Africa, everything around. So I mean, Israel becomes, in the eyes of the Western Americanized world, Israel becomes the oppressor.